To start off though with a keynote, I'm very pleased indeed to welcome Sue Rigby back to Stirling, not least because of her close and crucial strategic involvement from the start of the MMN programme. Sue is currently Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Student Development at the University of Lincoln, responsible for the student journey from application to alumni activities, and has oversight of the College of Science. Previously, she was head of the Grant Institute, assistant principal, and then vice principal for learning and teaching at the University of Edinburgh, during which time, of course, she was the strategic lead on the Learning to Work 2, making the most of Masters project. Sue is chair of the HEFCA Learn and Gain project and a member of the Scottish Funding Council QA Review Group. She spent 6 years on the Higher Education Public Information Steering Group and was academic lead on that committee's work on top postgraduate information needs. There is really nobody better, in my view, and I'm sure many of us here, to give the keynote to this workshop today. And Sue, can I invite you up to give the keynote to the conference? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm so sorry not to be a government minister. I'll do my best not to let you down. And I'm so sorry about the really nerdy CV. Just forget all that. We designed Making the Most of Masters on a train up to Aberdeen. And we're ever so pleased with ourselves. And then when we got off the train, I couldn't find my train ticket. And it turned out that the head of careers in Edinburgh had stolen it. So for me, this project, for the 4 years of its incredibly successful life, have been all about not being able to get out of Aberdeen station and trying to explain that I really was a serious academic and the head of careers had my ticket. It was not a good start. I was asked to try to think about making the most of Masters in a wider context of the taught postgraduate experience. And the risk and the advantage that I bring into the room is that that's quite different south of the border now. So at the University of Lincoln, we see a much more competitive environment already developed in undergraduate and postgraduate worlds. I think that's an advantage because I think it's moving north. And while none of us would wish it to happen, I think it is something that, in a sense, what we see south of the border is a vision of what the future may be. So I'll try and put some context around postgraduate employer engagement, which I think is key to the future. I wanted to start with some students. I know we're very lucky to have real students here, but just worth bearing them in mind because an awful lot of the work we do necessarily is with other colleagues, with professionals, with employers, and it's very easy to forget that the whole reason why we're doing this is so that our students are better served by their experience at universities. I think if we keep that right at the front, that there's a huge thing that we can do very well and not much that we can do badly. I think as well that this conference is at exactly the right time because there's a real storm brewing in higher education. Any of us involved in writing teaching excellence framework submissions? I can always pick you out because you look tired and nervous. We'll know that the topography of higher education is changing and the topography of the UK is changing. Employers more than ever need highly skilled workers, and that isn't primarily a sort of apprenticeship level. This is master's level and beyond. The UK, if we're going to stop admitting highly qualified staff from elsewhere, which the government does seem intent on doing, had better start growing more of their own, more of our own. And as universities, we have the opportunity to collect the best students, to attract to ourselves the most capable people who will go off, in a sense, as our brand ambassadors moving into the future. But in order to do that, we need to be able to guarantee to students an advantage to their study in a way that in the past maybe was more implicit than explicit in the contract that we made with our students. So this was just a slide to try to impress on you how global and complicated the world was. It's a wordle, and when I showed this to my kids, they thought it was a handkerchief kind of folded up and tossed in the bin, but it's actually South America, and it was trying to move into this rather broad global dimension and to remind you that this is students not just for Scotland or the UK, but we really need our master students to go everywhere and to work with companies that will expect them to travel a great deal. So sorry about the hanky. And tuition fees, well, this is a guddle in undergraduate world. But in postgraduate world, it's a real mess. So we are going to have to do this in a very financially constrained environment. So in the context that it's the new year and everything is changing, I've put together my New Year's resolutions, and I wanted to share them with you so they could be yours as well if any of them are of any use. And they form the basis for the rest of this talk. Here are my New Year's resolutions. I can take the first one. I have sorted out the TEF for the University of Lincoln. But the Teaching Excellence Framework is a nightmare way beyond the undergraduate year one. This is going to completely alter the way that universities are seen externally and the way we see ourselves. They metricate the future in a way that's deeply divisive. And MMM, or engaging with employers at postgraduate level, I think is a really neat way to bypass some of the toxicity that might otherwise persist from TEF. I, in Lincoln, and you are all going to have to engage with PGT loans. So we've got loans south of the border that are 10 grand to do what you want with, which means I can charge 10 grand fees if I want, if I can attract students in Lincoln. You have loans that are 10 grand, but only 5.5 of that can go to the university, and the rest is living fees, so you can only charge 5.5k, which is probably a better deal for students, but it's not so good for anybody in this room who isn't a student. The apprenticeships levy. This probably isn't too much on your radar yet, but it's an enormous amount of money being levied from employers into pots of money to teach people, as direct apprenticeships, as pre-degree apprenticeships, but also as higher apprenticeships and apprenticeships at master's level. The sticking points are enormous, but the pot of money and the incentive to engage with employers is gigantic. Somewhere in this, we are all going to have to get to grips with the fact that going through Westminster at the moment, there's an HE bill that completely changes the structure of the relationship between English universities and the government, and that the Scottish Funding Council is likely to merge. So who's going to look after you in future when a minister decides that something changes on a pinhead? So there are massive external things to get to grips with. And then there's Brexit. And then there's something around, well, what is it we're teaching students? What is it that at postgraduate level we aspire that they leave with, that they didn't arrive with? Something in there around learning gain. And something in ensuring that our students are highly skilled. We talk about it all the time, a highly skilled workforce. But they are skilled only if employers want them in highly skilled professions. So there's an awful lot to unpack there. And then there's Trump, so that's the final point. I can't think what else you do in a post-apocalyptic Scotland except eat wildlife, really. I want to try and unpack this in a little more measured way, so I have pictures. The Teaching Excellence Framework will measure undergraduate teaching this year as excellent on the basis of NSS satisfaction, Delhi scores for employment 6 months after graduation, and HESA retention data, which I hope is leaving you thinking, where in that is teaching excellence? This is a pilot, so it's possible that different metrics will be employed in the future, but they're likely to be worse. Because looking at the Learning Gain project, try and think of a test that measures learning gain that you would then use to grade institutions on teaching excellence. It isn't doable, so we are probably stuck with poor metrics. The TEF will move into postgraduate taught students in year 3, not next year but the year after. And there are no metrics for them, because there's no NSS. The Delhi data doesn't usually collect postgraduate people, and the retention scores are meaningless on a one-year programme, really. They're certainly a very different kettle of fish. So, south of the border, we're developing a postgraduate taught national student survey, which is even more. Are you getting desperately depressed about this? Because it's a never-ending cycle of metrication. So the beautiful thing, and the reason why I put this slide up, is that there is an excellent report that Hefke commissioned saying, what is a good metric? And it was published in this by a man called James Wilsden. And the report is the metric tide. And he says, well, that's fine. A good metric measures what is valued, measures what you're trying to get at, is repeatable, is reputable, and is in some way quantitative. And really the TEF metrics fail all of those criteria all the time, and the postgraduate taught ones will be worse. So you need to get ahead now in defining and owning the space whereby we say this is what good taught postgraduate education is. And that piece of work must be done within the next 24 months. And so realistically, it must draw on expertise that's already effectively in this room. Effectively, it must draw on the work that Michelle has done on the postgraduate experience, mainly in England, and it must draw on the work you're doing north of the border with MMM. Otherwise, where does it come from? So there is a real need for thought leadership, because in any bad situation, the good side is, if you're quick enough off the mark, you're often disproportionately effective. So I think there is a real challenge there, but a real opportunity as well. However you develop, we develop, our understanding of what excellence in master's study is, and it will definitely mean employer engagement. It will have to be done in this very complicated environment of student loans. And in some way, there's something about pint pots and quarts of something. £5,500 is not going to pay for a good master's course, I don't think. You? So there is a real issue there. And in order to work these things so they break even at a university level, there will have to be some real novelty brought into how they're run. It might be novelty of scale, it might be novelty of delivery, it might be novelty in partnership. But the status quo cannot give us a financially viable master's at the level the government will fund it at. So unless universities are prepared to run these as esteemed projects, there's a piece of work to do there. And I think the solution to that, again, is going to be looking at relationships with employers. Do our students need 180 credits taught by a university? All of them costing money? No, of course they don't. They don't get that now. Could they work in an institution in part? Could you develop a bespoke master's that just works with one company? Could you develop a master's that will become bespoke very easily, so that the risk is shared and the financial gain is sufficient to keep running it? However we do this, we need to see masters in the sense of being excellent, as yet to be defined, and financially viable. This is a market, and I think we should stop being worried about that now. It's been there for long enough that we should just embrace it and get on with it. We're really clever people. We can define good patterns of delivery, but the patterns we already define, only a minority of them will work in this new terrain. And then apprenticeships. Theoretically, this is the answer to all your worries, because so much money is being pumped into the apprenticeship levy that all you need is some way to kind of tap out the angel share and you're fine. The problem is that at the moment the bottleneck to developing any kind of apprenticeship, and particularly advanced apprenticeships, is huge. Can you have a huge bottleneck? Very narrow, it's bad. Because the government has to approve every rubric for different kinds of apprenticeship. And so far they've rejected just on half of the ones that have been submitted. And submitting it in the first place is a nightmare of the first water. So there is work to do here, but it has to be worth it. Because at the end of that, there's the link with employers, there's the engagement to support what otherwise I think is financially unsupportable going forward. But this is something that leaves, seriously capable administrators drooling and crying. It's very, very difficult. And of course, to have administered differently here yet. In the English context, we've been able to rely in the past on a buffer between government and universities that was given to us by HEFCE. And in Scotland, that buffer has been the Scottish Funding Council. And the Scottish Funding Council has not only buffered, but it's also supported innovation. So Making the Most of Masters was a project supported by SFC. And Michelle's project was supported by HEFCE. So those quangos in between that are very easy to kind of rue in a way, were able both to mitigate the impact of political change and support innovation. but they are very likely to disappear in their current form. The HA bill going through Westminster will turn HEFCE into the Office for Students, which may do many good things, but it's unlikely to support initiatives engaged in teaching. And if the Scottish Funding Council merges with enterprise initiatives and so on, it's very unlikely that they will have a lot of focus on us. So there are serious external changes that we can't be passive about. Universities will have to speak more clearly to government, which is why it's a real pity you've got to listen to me today and not the minister. But really you need the ministers in the room, because they will be much more directly engaged with your perceptions of excellence than they have been in the future. And going right back to the beginning, if you are prepared to take a leadership role in defining what excellence means like at taught postgraduate level and present models like MMM, you'll need to present them to politicians, not to highly skilled civil servants, many of whom had a background in higher education. So that lobbying function will also be something that in this room you have to take on. It's no longer an option to effectively write ministers out of the equation. They give you money, the money comes via the Funding Council and it's spent. The direct link means that you have to make it plausible that ministers should want to fund you. And that's something that we're exposed to much more in a small university in England like Lincoln. And it's very bitter, because what ministers will give money to is what means stuff to them, not what means stuff to me or you. So the formulation of value will have to be a politically amenable formulation of value. Otherwise, it doesn't have any traction. Whereas in the past, the Funding Council would do that job on your behalf. Don't mean to make you feel, oh yeah, sorry. There isn't one of Trump's. Brexit is, I mean, did you spend Christmas arguing about Brexit with recalcitrant relatives, or was that just me? I mean, how my sister-in-law, who teaches Spanish at junior school, could vote for Brexit is utterly beyond me, unless she's just so crap at teaching that she thinks, well, you know, nobody can travel anyway because they can't speak the language. At the moment, this is just scary news. But in March, unless Theresa May can't do it, she's going to pull the plug on our European links. And at that point, universities will be dramatically affected, and so will employers. And so, making the most of masters, individual projects that support masters with employer engagement, universities and their graduates will move into a world of really significant instability, which is disconcerting, but it also means that the stronger the relationships we can forge, the bigger the outcomes may be. So this is really a time of change. We were saying that when it was just the HE bill, but now it's the entire framework within which governance happens. We have no security about whether international students will be able to come and work with us. We have no security about whether our international staff will be allowed to stay. We have no idea what the exchange rate will be. We have no idea what the laws governing higher education or employment will be in 3 or 4 years. So we need to be ahead of the curve in forming very, very strong partnerships. But if there was ever a time when employers should be looking for strong local partnerships, it's when you can't any longer guarantee partnerships of international reach. And then bubbling up through undergraduate world is this idea that maybe undergraduate degrees have to earn their living much more explicitly than they've done in the past, that they have to generate work-ready graduates. Many of us would dispute that at undergraduate level. I could, depending on how many gin and tonics I'd had, I could be on either side of that debate. But for sure, the way that we've implicitly built skills into our curriculum will have to become explicit. That's fine, because at an undergraduate level, particularly in Scotland, you're way ahead. Your sense of graduate attributes, your sense of what it means to be a thinker at graduate level are internationally benchmarked. They are superb. But that is even more the case that you're going to need, I think, to generate the explicit skill set at postgraduate level. And there is no established set of graduate attributes. Very, very nice work done by Ronnie Bamber a few years ago started a journey towards that in thinking about what the characteristics of postgraduateness were. But I don't think we've moved very far from there since. So if you imagine a situation where you are working in local partnership with employers who very quickly will need these relationships because of external uncertainty, and will need that reassurance that your programme is not just excellent but relevant, there is a piece of work to do in establishing relevance. And it's a much better piece of work to do in groups, to do at a countrywide level, than it is to say, well, you know, in this university we define them in this way, in this university we define them in that way. But defining that at postgraduate level is going to become key. As the learning game projects work their way through the system, an undergraduate complexity comes into the open. What we will need at postgraduate level is a ready, pre-built solution to what skills are at master's level. What is it that these masters are for? At the moment, I think we are implicitly developing huge skills into our master's students, and working with employers is a way to bootstrap that. So we are absolutely secure that if a student successfully works with employers, the employers value their student's contribution, that student has gained skills at master's level. But it won't be enough to be oblique about this and say, well, it works. We'll have to actually unpack how. And I think that's, again, another piece of work to do. And then there's this, is it permissible to mention Nigel Farage and Michael Gove in the same keynote? Because in our post-experts world, then explaining our degrees in terms of their curriculum becomes increasingly difficult. And even explaining their value in terms of a degree, because, you know, classification becomes more difficult. This was a quote from the head of HR at Google. He said, grade point averages, this is American degrees, are worthless as a criteria for hiring, and test scores are also worthless. We found they don't predict anything. It's a bit arrogant, they predict something. My nephew's just got a 2-2 and he's not telling anyone about that. Except all of you. That's all right. Just don't tell him I told you. So they're a bit useful, but they're not the end of the world. What they're looking for, learning ability, leadership, intellectual humility, ownership, responsibility. If you go to Google, they'd like you to be able to code, but they'll teach you that bit. It's the rest. A lot of this is implicit in a good undergraduate degree. All of it needs to be explicit at master's level. I think it does need to be a masterclass in finessing these skills. And I think we may need to be very self-confident in asserting that that's what master's programmes do, because we're very used to describing them in terms of content, not in terms of skill outcome. And I think that will need to be a very big shift during the course of this year. Is there a solution to all of this? There is no solution we're all doing. No, there is. I have generated something that you can't see from the back, and it is my virtuous wheel of goodness. Because I'm not going to be miserable about the future anymore. I'm just going to see it as a set of options. But somewhere in my virtuous wheel of goodness, if you imagine generating a new real clarity about how what you wanted to teach delivers the purposes of that master's programme. And because you've done that very well, you would deliver a great student experience. Because they will, from the start, know exactly why they're there, what the next piece of learning is, what the next piece of engagement is. And that will probably then be some kind of unique offer in the new market where modes of delivery have to be financially viable, and that is a challenge. Imagine that you can generate a unique and effective offer. It generates high levels of skills, and therefore you develop very highly skilled applicants, because people want to come to your masters because they learn what they need for their own career progression or their own individual progression. So your student outcomes, in terms of the really terrible metrics that will be applied to the PGT-TEF, are brilliant. Because in a way, it doesn't matter if the metrics aren't appropriate, because we know that any of these surveys are a kind of overview of how students feel, rather than a precise answer to the questions that they're being asked. And that will allow you to engage with funding issues, to via money from the apprenticeships levy or from atypical sources, And its success and the pointless metrics will follow, and then you can develop a new great master's programme. How do you do that? I would say, well, you start by talking to the end user, and that's the employer. And I think we've not tended to design backwards. I had a lovely idea for a master's programme a few years ago, because I'm a paleontologist by background, and it's really hard to get really high quality paleoecology. And I thought you could do a lovely degree programme at master's level about, I mean, would anyone get a job at the end of that? But, I mean, would they care, because they'd have such a great time? But it never occurred to me to actually go and ask people who might employ paleontologists to help me design the curriculum. And my guess is it is not in the first 10 minutes of thinking of the academics in your institutions who are designing their master's programmes. It needs to become so. That means engaging with employers for curriculum design and for partnership working, which is where MMM is already that established provider of how to work in partnership. And you need to offer employers a really good reason to do this, because they're busy dealing with Brexit and everything else as well. But I think that's the answer. I think the outcome then is that the apprenticeship levy, however it's wired, will move into your domains rather than moving into training people for jobs in catering that pay £7.20 an hour when they get to 25. I think it will allow students to engage in the right industries, and if you were going to be very grandiose about this, you would say that will actually help the economy to get through this very difficult time. And it will help students to get through this difficult time in highly skilled employment. And it will generate an economy that hopefully is generating some taxes to pay our pensions, because otherwise we're all a bit... Now, why isn't everyone doing this? Because it seems to me it's self-evident. At any point in the last 20 minutes, have I broken any kind of logical thread? Actually, don't answer that, because this is my first day back at work since Christmas, and that probably was quite illogical. But why isn't everyone doing this? I think mainly because sometimes academics have other design parameters. I know my discipline. I'm a world leader in my discipline, and this is the masters I wish to teach. And that's great. It just won't wash anymore. It's not wrong. It's just old. A lot of people don't have the right connections. You don't have a connection with the industry you need. That's where an MMM type process can get that. But it's very difficult. It's intense effort to build and sustain a relationship with an employer. It's not straightforward, and it's asking a lot of an academic to do that. Some people just don't know how to do it, because there's a difference in language and a difference in value set and a difference in terminology and a difference in rate between employers and the universities. In Lincoln we have a big centre that deals with food manufacturing. Tesco's arrived on our doorstep Friday afternoon and said, can you design and run a 40 credit module starting Monday? And we said yes. And we didn't go, actually it wasn't me, it was people much more skilled than me, just worked over the weekend and started delivering it. But we work on a 2.5-year timescale to deliver a master's, and companies work on a weekend. So there's a lot to do. It's not unexpected that we don't know how to do this to begin with. That's why this community can learn together and share together best practice. And some people don't think it's the right thing to do. And I have a huge amount of sympathy with that. Learning is somehow enough in itself. But at master's level, people are electing to return purposefully. So I think at this level, that argument won't wash either. These have to be purposeful and effective, short interventions in someone's life. So I don't think any of the barriers and inhibitors stop us, either intellectually or practically, but I think it's networks like this that facilitate a solution. That's the plug for MMM in its old form, before it got its natty new MMM logo. It doesn't have to be this model. Lots of models will work, but starting here allows growth into a model that's bespoke for your discipline, your area, your university, your employer partners. And then just to finish with some students, because if we get this right, it's a value to employers, it's a value to universities, and it's a value to the most important people, in fact the only important people in this whole equation, who are the people we serve through the agency of delivering these degree programmes. So I will stop with her, and thank you very much for listening.
very much, Sue. That was, as always, thought-provoking, challenging. It gives us a lot of food for thought. There will be a question and answer session towards the end of the morning, and so we'll leave any questions to Sue to that point in time. But Sue, thanks very much again for getting us off to a brilliant start in the conference this morning.